I've watched a lot of people do Iboga. Many of them come out evangelists, including most of them are there's not so much pulling in people from the veteran community. It tends to be pulling in people more from the people on a very strong self-development path who have done quite a lot of other medicine work. They've probably worked with psilocybin, they've probably worked with ayahuasca, and
Sure.
people come out saying this medicine is different. There's a way that it gets to the root of things. It is a root.
This is the way, Green Beret, where warriors talk about the weight they've carried. Welcome back to another episode of the Awake Green Beret podcast. I am really excited today. Today we have a very special guest with us, Rachel Zurher. She is the founder of Wild Genius, where she helps high-performing entrepreneurs break out of their burnout and helps reconnect them with what actually matters. As a certified Big Leap coach with a background in somatic and body-based practices, she guides people out of overdrive and into alignment where success feels alive and not forced. Her work blends conscious leadership, emotional awareness, and deep inner work to help people lead, create, and live from a place that's real, grounded, and fully their own. Additionally, she works in the plant medicine space, specifically with Iboga, which is the topic today. Rachel, I'm so happy to have you here. Any opening comments?
Yeah, just happy to be having this conversation, Matt. And I sort of feeling honored and amused and humble at becoming a bit of an ambassador for this plant, Iboga, that I've been in relationship with for a few years. So really excited to come talk to you today about something
Awesome.
that's been very important to me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that whatever we get called into, there is that responsibility to be ambassadors and such for the work that we do. One quick before we launch into our first question, one quick word from our sponsors. First up is Larabelle and the Crazy Tree, a story written co-authored by my wife and I, found on Amazon, or you can find it at awakegreenberet.com. It's a young girl's journey to embrace her authenticity and to not fit into the crowd. Secondly, we have From Green Beret to Shamanism, One Man's Journey to Heal. Again, both of these books, 100% of the proceeds go to charity, to nonprofit. This one to helping veterans find ceremony, and this one we donate to Donor Connect, or organ donor charity, because when we lost our son, we utilized Donor Connect. And finally, to my favorite soda, Olipop, plant-based, only 2 grams of sugar, nothing artificial, probiotics, prebiotics, and fiber. So drink to your health. All right. Thanks for letting me get that out of the way. Rachel, let's start with broad context. And this, like, just for those that are listening to this for the first time, I will tell you that this even took a while for it to resonate. But I always thought of Iboga as the plant, Ibogaine as the active molecule. And while I think that's true, what I've come to learn, and you can help frame this for me, is that both Iboga and Ibogaine can be separate individual types of ceremony. Can you help explain that for us?
Yes. So, there obviously we ended up in this conversation because you've been talking a lot about ibogaine and the way that it's taken the veteran world by storm and the difference it's making for lots of people. And so I happen to hear you talking about that. And there's just one piece that is always very important for me in my journey with Iboga is just this difference between Iboga and ibogaine. And it's a misconception a lot of people have, and I just find it really helpful and important. And the truth is you can have experiences and journeys with either of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Iboga is the raw plant. It's like the coffee bean or the coca leaf, if you will. And then ibogaine is what's a compound extracted from Iboga, the plant, much like cocaine would be extracted from coca leaves or caffeine would be extracted from coffee beans. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's obviously similar, it's obviously related, but it is quite a different experience to be in the field of Iboga, the extract, or sorry, Ibogaine, not to confuse anyone any further, Ibogaine, the extract, versus Iboga, the plant. And I have spent 2 years as a participant and an assistant in a container with a shaman I've been working with who serves Iboga, the plant, to people. And so I've sat in 7 ceremonies with Iboga, the plant, in the last couple years, and several others with him with other experiences. And what he likes to say often is that Ibogaine. If you think you've heard anything about Iboga, the odds are very high that what you've heard is about Ibogaine, and
Yeah.
that Ibogaine is Iboga's sort of bad PR agent. And I don't mean, and in fact, it's actually in some ways it's good, it's its PR agent, but it's just wanting kind of the world at large to realize that there is a difference between the two, the sort of raw plant substance that you can also use in ceremony, or the extracted, more medicalized extract, which also is incredibly powerful. No one would argue with that. They're very different experiences, and there actually is probably more access for most people to ibogaine, the more medicalized experience. But I want people to just really realize that there is this whole other world, and that's the one that I have a lot of experience with, is the whole other world. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I am so like I think between the time that like first was introduced to the topic of iboga and ibogaine or iboga and ibogaine, and now I have matured through that. Certainly since I was talking about it recently, I think I had that distinction, that understanding, but absolutely fell victim to that bad PR, so to speak, in the beginning, not understanding because I think that if you look at it from an ayahuasca standpoint, right? Like there's no way to really have an ayahuasca journey separate from it is the extracted molecule, period. End of story.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, I mean, I don't wanna be, like, splitting hairs here, but I think it's important that people have a real good sense of what they're getting into and what the relationship is that they are, and just that this world that is expanding and increasing pretty exponentially, even just in the 2 years since I first came into relationship with this plant, it's really evolved. It's really helpful to know what to look out for and pay attention to. And for example, if somebody were to go to Gabon, where Iboga is from, and do a ceremony with any of the different Bwiti lineages there, and just to be very transparent, I have not, but I have friends and mentors who and have met a number of people who've done through that and heard about it. Those are all people working with various different forms of Iboga, the plant in plant form. And there's actually quite a few lineages and traditions over there in Gabon. It's not just one thing. You can go find a lot of different ways people are serving it. And of course, everyone's going to think their way is the best. And then
Mhm.
there's the container that I've been in 7 times is its own whole thing that a teacher of mine who's actually originally from Europe um, has created his own sort of work of art around this medicine over many years of servings, run this container probably over 100 times, maybe more. And so, there's different things. But so to realize that the thing that you're going to go down to a clinic in Mexico and have an ibogaine experience is quite a different animal and beast than what you would go to Gabon and have a iboga experience. They're very different.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on those differences between the very clinical medical ibogaine and the more what I would call ceremonial traditional iboga?
Yeah. And I just want to put the disclaimer that like all of this is coming from, a pretty uh high level of exposure and experience, but I haven't ever worked with ibogaine. I'm not an expert on it, and I don't even serve iboga at this stage in my world. So I'm just wanted to like offer my proper humility as like a well acquainted but not expert. And so I'll say this, my teacher has sat with Iboga itself hundreds of times and over a decade. And he's also used to serve ayahuasca and has lots of experience with lots of medicines. He will never comment on anything that he hasn't tried, which I think is a wise move on his point. And he did try ibogaine himself. So the best side by side comparison I have is how he described it.
Mm,
And his description was that the ibogaine experience for him, he felt a real missing of a spirit, the spirit of iboga that he is in very deep relationship with as a man who is carrying iboga as a medicine throughout the world. That was his personal lived experience, but kind of on a more practical level, taking ibogaine is a much more medicalized experience. So let me just set the scene. This is the thing I can speak to from true experiences. Let me set the scene of what the containers I've been in have been like, where we take iboga. Like I said, this container I've done I think it's a masterpiece, a work of art, the way that he pulls together the consciousness experience. But he holds a 6-day retreat where participants come in. It's usually not folks who are struggling in any kind of active addiction. That is not a good fit for this particular container. So it's more, people really like dealing with depression and definitely obstacles in their life, but can be suicidality, but not active addiction, so that the body is healthier than perhaps like someone in active addiction would be, and that people are generally functioning fairly decently in their life, but they have a sense that there's a lot more available to them. or some deep thing that's holding them back that they want to get to. So just who's coming in is a little different. It's a 6-day container, but then the experience of the medicine itself is we're actually literally eating the sawdust of the
Mm.
root. And so it's there's only so much of that you can take in at once. So it's a slow process of dosing it over about 10 hours. And it's like capfuls of the ground up bark of
Mhm.
the root of a shrub, Iboga, that grows in Gabon. And so we're literally there grinding it with a little ninja blender. I mean, this is behind the scenes. The participants aren't dealing with that, but and sifting it and then putting it, people get a scoop and they swallow it. And then towards the end we switch to capsules, but it's so the quantity that you're taking too, it's a volume that's on the order of each person has a process of muscle testing, intuiting, working with a shaman to find their own dose. It's not just one dose and we're not looking at body weight. It has to relate to your intentions
Mm.
and also, it's really a quite a inside out experience of choosing the dose. But the dose is anywhere from like 15 grams would be a fairly low dose for somebody. And I've been in the room when somebody took 55 grams, which if
Wow.
you have any sense of what it's like, that's a pretty solid amount of sawdust to get into your body. So
Mm.
it's a slow process and then the journey builds over many hours. We're all in a room together on mattresses, mostly in silence. There's a
Mhm.
little bit of music here and there. And everyone has a bucket in case they need it, but not everyone, certainly not everyone does. And then there's a bunch of different like moments throughout. We come out after about 30 hours and folks are still
Wow.
in quite a tender state. And then there's another several days of time together of integration and moving through. But so it's in some ways it's slower and it's
Mhm.
also and it's quite deep and there's no doctors around, there's no IVs. We do this in houses that people offer us and things like that. And it's because if you could imagine the difference between, how much coffee you'd have to drink to overdose on caffeine versus how much straight caffeine pill you'd have to take. The quantities are so different when it's distilled. It's like it's almost a different animal, the level of like medical super like all the things about the heart and the medical supervision. It's not that there's like zero heart concern here, but if somebody's a relatively healthy, well person and
Mhm.
they're going through the process that he does where they're, matching their own dose through their own intuitive process, we're not using medical supervision, and in the hundreds of people he's served, the only medical issues that have ever happened have been people mixing with other substances against, outside of the agreements or having undisclosed, like, things that they had lied to him about, basically. So
Mm.
the average healthy person, there's really not. There's a lot of risk of the risks are internal and mental, perhaps, but the physical is much less scary, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I really, really appreciate that example you gave about overdosing on caffeine through coffee or through extracted caffeine. That makes a lot of sense to me about the risks with Ibogaine and the Ibogaine clinics and why there are so many precautions. And actually, if I may, I'm just going to hammer this one home for sort of I guess a just a precautionary space of saying if you're hearing about this for the first time or even if you're hearing about it for the 100th time, let me be very clear. What Rachel is pointing out again, there's the difference between Iboga and Ibogaine, and if you have any interest in going to an Ibogaine clinic, what I would strongly urge and suggest, plead, if you will, is that you do your due diligence and that you make sure that, again, because that is the extracted molecule in the caffeine sort of an example. If you're working with that, you really, really must have qualified professional medical personnel in the room. And there has to be good deal of due diligence on their part to screen you to make sure that you're not showing up with any sort of narcotics, alcohol, anything in your system and things like that. Thorough screening. So I just want to offer that caveat to the audience, if I may.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also, I don't wanna be flippant about the risks of any, like, really major psychedelic journey. I mean, it's a big journey, and there's a certain amount of, obviously risk involved in, any big thing we do like that. It's just, and another just the level of fear around this particular medicine in the sense of like, "Oh gosh," there's a little bit of misinformation. I just wanna add that there is one other layer too, that a lot of up until fairly recently, a lot of the people who ever had any exposure to ibogaine whatsoever was in like severe, severe narcotic addiction.
Hmm.
Ibogaine helping people get off heroin, for example. And people's bodies who have been through a good amount of time of severe opiate addiction are going to be in a, those can be pretty fragile health wise too. So there's also that, the difference between just taking into account kind of the population that we have as a lot of the data set, not the whole. And I think as more and more people discover Iboga and Ibogaine, it's changing. But just thinking about also like comparing the health implications and fragility of somebody who's going through withdrawal from a narcotic addiction and has been in active addiction for a long time versus the resilience and the health risk of somebody who's kind of in a just a healthier, more normal functioning state. Just keeping that in mind too, that some of the data set is from a population that isn't super representative.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. Let me ask you this. My understanding, and please, I mean, this is a chance I want to be really vulnerable in this space, and I want to ask the right questions, even at the risk of making myself look foolish. But my understanding here is, and I guess the example I use or the metaphor I use is that all the psychedelics in many ways offer some of the similar experiences. But I also believe that they are also very unique to themselves. And I see it as a Swiss Army knife. In fact, I may have used that example when I started talking about this on social media a couple of weeks ago. And that they're, like we're not going to, carve a stick with the corkscrew, and we're not going to open a bottle with the blade, and we're not going to use the file, right? And so what I've always understood about, again, the molecule, ibogaine, is that its unique properties was that it did a real hard reset of the dopamine neurotransmitters in the brain. That's why it works so well with heroin and fentanyl and other addicts, is because it wasn't just the 30 days of neuroplasticity or the trauma that was causing the addiction. On top of that, it rewired the dopamine neural pathways. Now, first of all, is that true? And second of all, does that happen even though you're saying you don't normally work with addicted populations, but does that still happen with Iboga or Iboga?
Yeah. So this is where I wanna really be careful about sticking to my lane. And so I wanna say, as far as I know, that sounds accurate.
Okay.
And yeah, and I think like that does make sense to me why that would be a really why it's a potent, helpful medicine for addiction. Here's what I can tell you about what I know about Iboga. And it's a really sophisticated helper, teacher, guide. Like my experience of it is it's very strongly. And so I don't know that there's a lot of research. I'm sure there's actually I'd be shocked if there's any about what Iboga as a whole, with sort of the wholeness of the experience does to people. I'm sure that if that effect is coming from Ibogaine, there is some of that. But the quality of the journey with Iboga is something I can definitely talk about. And the quality of it is it does tend to help people a lot with patterns. And patterns are and it also helps you come into a very different relationship with your mind.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so I have seen people go through an Iboga journey and make a lot of progress on all kinds of addictions, not just, opioid addictions. And I honestly think Ibogaine might be a more appropriate thing to do than Iboga for a heroin addiction, a fentanyl addiction. I suspect it really would be. That medical setting is the thing. This is for more the subtler addiction to addiction to particular relationship dynamics, or addiction to, I've seen people come off of tobacco on it. I did see somebody who was struggling with, kind of a very high functioning cocaine habit, find peace from that with it. I've watched a lot of people do Iboga. Many of them come out evangelists, including most of them are, there's not so much pulling in people from the veteran community. It tends to be pulling in people more from people on a very strong self-development path who have done quite a lot of other medicine work. They've probably worked with psilocybin. They've probably worked with ayahuasca. Not everybody,
Mhm.
but the average of the bell curve. And
Sure.
people come out saying this medicine is different. There's a way that it gets to the root of things. It is a root,
Mm.
and it's the life review quality that is somewhat known for. It's every journey for every human is different. So I don't, but it is a common theme that people will get to go back. And I was with someone whose mother had died when they were very young, and one of their intentions was to go like cover memories of their mother, and they got to spend a bunch of time just like in really joyful childhood memories with that they had completely forgotten, like back back with their mother. Like that was something they experienced. And I've also heard of people experiencing going to face their um really seeing really traumatic moments, like a very, a death that happened in their childhood and going back to that moment and getting to see it again from a different point of view. In my first journey, I saw my own birth, which I had a lot of birth trauma around and got to move things through that. So it's a bit of a trickster medicine. It has a really strong sense of humor. It's very kind in my experience, but it can also be grueling and quite a taskmaster. It holds quite the masculine pole.
Mm.
Yeah, helping you see the patterns and habits of the loops you get stuck in, the stories you get stuck in, and why you're repeating things over and over again. It can really help you get to the root of those. I also want to say people have such different experiences. And so I don't want someone, I wouldn't want somebody to think like, oh, I'm going to take Iboga and then I'm definitely just going to see my whole life from birth to, birth to present go
Yeah.
between my eyes. It really, really relates to your intentions. What Iboga will bring you what you need and create the experience you need to get you what you're asking for. And so sometimes it'll bring visions that are not at all about your life. I've had people talk about, beautiful scenes and traveling through space. I've had people talk about being on a game show. Like it's going to bring you the experience you need to create where you're headed. And sometimes the experience can be because there's something you need to see or something you need, and sometimes you see it briefly and that's all you need. Sometimes you stay looping with it. Sometimes it's total nonsense. People have the experience of purging garbage out of their mind I've heard of somebody having literally like a dump truck driving around dumping things out of their mind. Somebody else feeling like just like all the files were defragging. It'll come in and in alignment with the intentions you've set, it will offer an experience that fits with your personality and your needs and your path and give you an experience. And so sometimes that can include pretty vivid reviewing moments of life or seeing scenes again or getting to replay what you need to see. And for some people have none of that. So it's not like if you're going to take it, that's definitely going to happen.
Yeah. I again, I really appreciate that. And again, I think, I don't know where my audience lands in terms of experience, but what I want to assume or at least speak to some of the lesser experienced people with this is I really appreciate what you're saying, Rachel, because one of the things that I feel like I work at very often is I guess there's no other way to describe it, but expectation management. I feel like, the Aaron Rodgers, Joe Rogan, Sean Ryans of the world, Will Smith talking about their experiences. And I'm not suggesting that any of them talk like for clickbait or clout or anything like that. But I do think that we have these experiences and they are very personal to us. And in many times, and this is why I like to throw out the word infallible or ineffable all the time, right? Like for those of you who don't know, the word ineffable means there's no words to describe it. And so in our struggle to describe the indescribable, sometimes that can be really hard. And then as we receive that, as we're recipients of these other celebrities and influencers talking about their experience, I think that there's a place where we're preparing to go into our first experience with a certain set of expectations that I'm grateful to hear you working towards expectation management in a way, if I may call it that, to say like, hey, everybody's experience is going to be the same. It's intentional based. It's, like all that. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And absolutely, if you come in expecting any particular experience, guaranteed you're not going to get it. It's going to surprise you. That's pretty good. And I've been in 7 ceremonies. I've sat through 2 of them with a full dose as a full participant. As assistant, I would take some, but it's quite a different experience being in the role where I'm, up and about and tending to people. The intention is different, so the experience is different, even with a similar amount of medicine sometimes. And just my 2 sort of full journeys deep in were radically different from one another, and both were incredibly positive and incredibly meaningful, but they would not have looked like the same show.
Yeah. Now, let me introduce the next question. From what I understand, and again, I should be more like your shaman mentor with his refusal to talk about anything he hasn't sat with, because here I am talking about Iboga and Ibogaine that I've never sat with. But frankly, it really is from a place I hope people understand, from a place of wanting to learn and understand. And but I do agree with him. I have made an effort to sit with as many of the medicines as I can. And actually, it is Iboga and Ibogaine. There are only 2 that are on the to-do list someday. But from what I understand from Ibogaine is that it's a very, very strong disassociative. Now, I have heard people say they were aware of some of the things that were going on in the room. They could hear other people screaming and yelling. But some people will say that, like, no, they were out for 18 to 24 hours, didn't except for the journey, had no understanding of the presence around them. Can you comment on that with Iboga?
Yeah. It is less so. Like, we have folks crawl to the bathroom on their own. Like, we're all in one room, and then we don't force them to crawl. We recommend crawling because it's a hunting medicine. So it sharpens your senses.
Hmm.
um you get so sensitive to sound, but also like reflexes get so fast, you can move really fast without realizing it, and then you're kind of unstable. So we recommend people crawl, but it's like, we don't people can get to the bathroom by themselves. Mostly people will have a mask, like a sleep mask on, and be in the dark, kind of on their back in the journey, but at any moment they can pull the mask off. I've watched in my own, I'm a writer, I like to write things down. My own journey, after like my second out of 8 doses, I like, there's no way I'm getting to this notebook again. But I've watched people as an assistant keep picking their notebook up like for, 20 hours. And so I would say that is probably a difference. I also haven't, had my own experience with Ibogaine, but people have had hallucinations around, like, I've had more than one story of somebody like convinced a friend of theirs was in the room during the ceremony coming in to deliver something or something like that. Stuff like that, where it's like they thought things were happening around the room that definitely didn't. That
Hmm.
is not horribly uncommon, but there is a way in which I felt very aware of my body, very aware of my digestive functions. I felt myself ovulate during my first journey,
Wow.
quite vividly. It was like really, it was a moment. And then, yeah, I was always kind of like, I wasn't that interested in the room I was in, but I knew where I was, and I could find my way back to it and sit up and take a dose. And very, for me, actually, a big part of my first journey was watching kind of an immature franticness that would come about me when I made a decision to like roll over or grab my water or something like that. And then getting really, really slow and intentional about like moving with a lot of presence and taking action with a lot of presence and a lot of trust and calmness. This was just my own lesson that I was learning, but it was very much a like aware of how I'm moving through the space and actually coming into seeing a pattern of not being very aware and of being a little bit in a fear state and clumsiness, and then getting to come underneath the pattern and arrive more in presence and then interact differently. So yeah, so I'd say that is a difference.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting and really helpful for me to understand the differences as well. Some of this we've already covered, but from your experience, what is it that Iboga is showing people about the root of the trauma? And before I let you answer that, I guess what I was going to say is I wanted to kind of also emphasize what you said earlier about, it gets to the root and it's a root. Like for people who are just hearing this and may want to like brush that off or brush it aside, please don't. Like that is really quite Mother Nature, plant medicine, in my opinion, plays really strongly into metaphor, and those are ways in which we use to understand our relationship with them. So I really appreciate you saying that. And so just to emphasize that as we go in, can you comment to how that works on the roots of our addiction?
Let me just listen here. Um, However it needs to is kind of my slightly cheeky answer. I mean, it's what I'll say is the form that takes is radically different person to person and journey to journey. And some people's journeys, they're not even sure they could say they remember or could explain anything that happened in it. And my shaman always says you will have no idea. You can't even begin to have an idea what you got out of it until 6 months later, and even then, maybe longer. So some of it can be happening very below the conscious level. How does it do it? I mean, on a spiritual level, my experience of Iboga is that we sort of like step behind the matrix and like make adjustments and then step back in and things are different. So how to explain that? I mean, and then again, this is how it's worked with me. I don't want to say this is how it does it. And it's not exactly the same as like the scientific answer about dopamine. For me, part of how Iboga has helped me work with trauma is that it has literally taught me skills. Like my first journey felt like an escape room, which makes sense because I like escape rooms, where I would get a clue and I would unlock it and it would help me like unlock a new skill. And Iboga would give me a vision or an experience that would be kind of like a clue. And then I would get to unlock something. And for me, what it's been unlocking is the capacity to bring deep presence to allowing my emotions to move through me without attachment to the story in a really profound way. And my second journey, I spent probably 23 hours, 24 hours or something going through this loop over and over again where I could just feel like I was rewiring my neural pathways, where like something in the room, like somebody making a noise or, someone over here purging into a bucket or something in the room would stimulate an emotion and it wouldn't be proportional. Like someone would be like sneezing over there. And then I would feel this huge wave of hatred that like
Mm.
clearly wasn't really about the person sneezing over there, but there was something that in me that needed to be felt. It was somewhere at the root of something that had to do with my intentions that was holding me back. And with the help of the medicine and some of the skills it was teaching me, it was like this capacity to just let the hatred be there with no story, like really disconnecting the story, disconnecting the history that it might have in me, and then moving it just as a pure energy through me, and then again and again. And it was teaching me very specific techniques around my mind and my breath. I won't get into it all here. That is how Iboga has been my teacher, and yet I am a person very oriented to the body, and I'm a very one of the ways Iboga is my teacher. And I'm very oriented to feeling, so it makes sense that it was working with me in that way. This is a much more sort of shamanic, mysterious answer than like the scientific one. But so that's, I can say for me, that's one of the ways it has worked with me. But I think it goes to the root. My shaman talks a lot about it taking us down and into the void, the nothingness. There's sort of a malleability and an anything's possible and a burning through and a letting go that comes there. I mean, this is not going to satisfy the literal sciencey folks.
That's
And
okay.
yeah, it gives you what you need, and it shows you. I mean, another big thing that's pretty common, and that was definitely my experience, was really coming into different relationship with how much of my pain is coming from my mind and pain of my everyday experience, and giving me the tools I needed to get around it. But if you were talking to somebody else, they would probably have a very different answer for you on that. And I think the truth is I don't know, it's a mysterious being that we're in relationship with. So
You don't know
I'm a
that it is?
no, I don't know exactly how it gets to the root of the trauma. It is a mysterious being that we are
Yeah.
in relationship with.
Well, actually, I love that answer. So don't feel any
Good.
sort of like yeah, like hesitation over that because in I'm a firm believer in the word entheogens for this family of, and frankly, this has been really helpful for me to like tease out the fact that there's entheogens, meaning for those who've never heard that expression, it's the sacred plants, the Latin for sacred plants. And so Iboga being clearly an entheogen, having that sacred relationship to the divine, that connection. And then there's Ibogaine, which again feels, and that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, where your shaman talks clearly about there not be, like it being soulless. And I don't want to, again, I don't want to, like disparage that path does seem to hold a space for some really particular difficult problem sets. So good, but let's also honor and respect the differences and celebrate those for what they are, right? And so the one that has the more spiritual entheogen connection to the divine, all of that's lovely. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was just, that was his particular experience with it. But it makes sense to me that when you extract something, you lose the wholeness of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, my next question sort of, I guess, goes into the how do I frame this question? So, if I understand correctly, there's a 6-day period that they're with you ceremonially, I guess, and roughly a day and a half of that is actually in the journey, and then there's another, I guess, 3.5 to 4 days, or yeah, 3.5 days where they're still with you doing what I guess I would call integration, or what I
Yeah.
think you said was integration,
Yeah.
and then
Well,
sorry, let me, and then if I do you also hold to the fact that there's like 30 days of neuroplasticity after ceremony, and then
absolutely.
still like 6 months of still distilling in that? Can you help me tease that out?
Yeah. So just to be a little more precise about it, it's about a day and a half of like arriving in preparation, and then another, 30 hours. It feels like several days. I mean, we go in one and come out as if, there's there's a whole chunk of time that goes by. We really actually, and we literally enter the timeless. Once we enter the medicine field, everyone turns in their phones, we cover all the clocks, and time goes away. Which is a pretty cool experience. And then it's part of what has me keep going back. I'm kind of addicted to the timelessness. And then yeah, so we come out, and then it's another couple days of integration all together. And then yes, absolutely, my shaman at the end of every container, he's always, this 30 days is your 30 ripe days. He talks about it as if you poured a new concrete floor, and if the concrete is still setting. And so he, highly recommends not using any other medicines in that time. and being really, really conscious about this is your window to set new patterns, to create new neural pathways, to, all the revelations you may have just had in here to really bring them into your life and really let changes happen. So yeah, absolutely. That 30 days is one crucial landmark. And then after that, you wouldn't throw a party on a concrete floor while it's still setting. It would ruin it forever. Whereas, once it's set, then you can build whatever you want on it. So yeah, that 30 days is really key. And then the 6-month period is another moment. And then really, yeah, so I mean, his first Iboga experience, he's come up with a lot of tools that are part of this 6 days where he really like seeds a lot of things and does a lot of things in particular moments in order that help people go in well and come out well and really harvest what they learned and integrated into their lives. But he didn't have any of that over a decade ago during his first one. And so he had years where he was just like, why the heck did I do that to myself? What was that for? He didn't see any change in himself. It took him a while to be like, actually, that was completely life changing. And the people around him could see it first. But so there's this interesting, yeah, it's definitely kind of a long tail of an experience. And some people go back and do it multiple times. And many people just have their one experience and bow and call it good. I was
Mm.
just with a friend last night who did it once over 2 years ago, and he hasn't stepped into any workshop container since then because he's just been like, yep, okay, I'm integrating for
Nice.
years. So
That's wisdom right there. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Because there's both ends, right? There's people who may need it and fear and reluctance and they're not taking the leap. And then there's people on the other end of it. And that friend sounds like he's in the middle. The other end being, kind of chasing experiences, not doing the integration, not doing the work.
Yeah.
So
And then for me, it's like I had no idea when I stepped into that first ceremony. I was going into one ceremony and I ended up in 9 retreats with this shaman in 2 years. And for me, it was very much just each one was listening to a call. I wasn't like, oh God, I have to chase this. Looking back, I'm like, wow, how did that happen? But it was through a lot of listening. It was
yeah,
very much calling me. So
which again, to emphasize, everybody's on their own path, and
yeah,
it's not for us to talk or criticize or judge anybody's path, just to respect it. And so, yeah, I love that. So I have this belief, and see how this fits within your framework. But I have this belief that really integration starts when we say, "Okay, I'm going to ceremony." And
hmm
ends at a minimum 30 days beyond that. So sometimes, like let's say, like with a psilocybin ceremony, for example, that could be as little as 2 weeks before, or at least in thereabouts, and up to 30 days. So about a 6 week period where we're actually in ceremony. And my belief or practice is that we're doing integration in the pre, during, and post phases of that whole entire window. If that sits well with you, if that rings for you, resonates with you, can you talk to me about the pre work that people do for an Iboga ceremony leading up?
sure. Yeah, that does sit with me. I don't know if I would have used the word integration, but the ceremony starts the moment you say yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And then specifically, my shaman has people microdose for up to 6 weeks and sometimes even more, but usually 6 weeks is the ideal ahead of time.
Microdose.
Microdose
So,
Iboga. Microdose
okay.
Iboga.
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, so he'll send you a microdose kit, which is just a little baggie of sawdust, and you take a tiny bit, and he has a protocol for how many days in a row. It's not every day, but it's to really start to come into relationship with the spirit of the plant and the medicine itself, and to start to build the relationship over an arc. So there's actually this very literal physical thing happening leading up to the ceremony. And also, your patterns, some of the ways it may work with you, you start to have those. Some people have people have all different experiences, but I've seen people have this sense of like, oh gosh, my patterns are getting louder. They're getting louder, so I can't ignore them. Like the way I get reactive around this thing or whatever it is. So yeah, so there's the microdosing ahead of time. And he sends out some information, but I will say if anyone is used to the preparation and the dieta around, that people generally do around ayahuasca, Iboga is more chill than that. There's definitely an invitation to pay attention to your food in the weeks leading up to it and eat really clean and healthy, and magnesium is good and things like that, but it's not nearly as sensitive, I guess I would say, and it loves meat. Iboga is like it's a hunting medicine, so it pairs well with meat, which is quite different than ayahuasca too. So if anyone is used to that world, that like we've had chefs come in who have been used to cooking for ayahuasca retreats, and they're always surprised at how I mean, people's dietary restrictions are the thing, but the container doesn't usually have any, especially after we've had the medicine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and the preparation, people will be on their own journeys. I mean, the way this particular shaman holds it is you're preparing the moment you say yes, you're microdosing as you come in, and then as soon as people, their trip that you miss your plane on the way to the ceremony, that is definitely part of the ceremony, that kind of thing, everything. And then certainly the moment you walk in the door, we're in, and before we go in, that's the thing. People's patterns tend to be really loud. Everyone's kind of like an exaggerated caricature of themselves a little bit, which takes some patience to just be like, okay, that's what we're here for. And then we go in, and then the tone is very different as we get out. But then, yeah, then we usually do a couple integration calls with people after, and that 30-day period. He tends to, he's holding groups, and he does want to offer resources, but he also really tends to put a lot into people's own sovereign hands. He gives them the information that they might need, but that really they're working with their own journey. They're their own healer. They're their own teacher alongside the plant and God and the spirit and whatever you want to. But yeah, it's a whole mysterious journey that everyone can be on. And yeah, we'll certainly start the moment you decide you're going.
Yeah. I love that. Just really makes me happy to hear you say that. Kind of want to shift gears a little bit, and can you just help me understand, because and I don't really have a lot of context. I can't really recall where I heard this, but at one point I had heard that there is some environmental issues with it.
Mm.
Kind of the same, I think, with a little bit like, well, specifically to do with like peyote, for example, where it's the land that it's traditionally grown on is being gobbled up by housing development, things like that. So, but I've also understood that the government of Gabon, like, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with I think it's the coalition. I think it's Americans for Ibogaine. Have you heard of that one?
I've heard of it. I'm not like I don't know a ton about it, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a man. I mean, Rick Perry's involved with it, and I forget the other gentleman's name, who's pretty outspoken about it. And I know that they've gone to Gabon and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that they're beginning to cultivate the plant in other places so that it takes some of that pressure off. Is there any light you can shed on that for us?
Yeah, I have like there's some things I have heard. I feel again a little cautious about. I don't want to be another source of misinformation or rumor, and I don't have a
Fair.
lot that I can solidly say. I can tell you, so my shaman has, been in relationship with folks in Gabon for many years. He gets his medicines from there and Congo and other places. And what I've heard him say, and I would say, this is that the the government of Gabon declared it a national treasure. I have not fact checked this myself. That sounds like it would be a good thing, but that it partly created a circumstance where it meant that only a few people had the right to do anything with it, export it. And so it concentrated power in a way that I can tell you my shaman wasn't a fan of. There's a way that sort of the small people farming it now can't, be in relationship and have it profit and benefit them. So that was his experience with that. I don't really know is the truth of the answer. That um, I do think it's definitely what I can say is it's certainly something to be aware of, pay attention to, and the way that I mean, we have thousands, I'm sure, of examples over the last many hundreds of years of the way that demand and economics and local economies and power and money can get really messy and have a lot of unintended consequences. So to have an eye on it, I think is really wise, and to be aware that like just like your food is coming from somewhere, your medicine is coming from somewhere, and that there is a supply chain there and that it has impact. Like I think that I like that you're raising the conversation. I don't have a lot of like clear hard information to add to it. I can tell you like the things I've heard third hand.
Yeah. Yeah, fair. And same with me. I don't really know. There's like you said, I think I've heard some things second and third hand, and I really appreciate what you're saying. I agree. Like I always say this about ayahuasca, like you can get off the plane in Peru, and right outside the airport there'll be people selling bottles of it. And I don't have any issue with that because we're not walking those people's shoes. We sit in a place of incredible privilege. And so there is this supply and this demand, and we have to be conscious about how we obtain our medicines. And it's not just the supply, it's the collectiveness of it. It's like how it impacts the whole entire, environment, the rest of the world, those specific regions, those tribes, those people, everything. And so it's just something I guess I'll just kind of pin there and just say for anybody listening, just be thoughtful, be mindful. that's part of our due diligence process to, I think, to look into those topics and those realities really, because as we've spoken, this is an entheogen. It is a living being. It's an entity, in my opinion. And so it has an energy about it, and how that's obtained will matter and affect the medicine, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I agree, and the thing I really appreciate about the again, this teacher I've been working with for a few years now is that, he's in such a deep relationship with this medicine that he's just very deeply in surrender and devotion to it. And, he there's just a lot of trust that he has around, I mean, he does have his people he knows and has been working with for many years, but there's also this sense of, like, just a deep trust that there's something larger than him bleh, orchestrating, like, whether his package gets through customs and things like that. Like, he's like, "Well, if I'm in alignment with the medicine and the energy of the medicine, then there will not be an obstacle." And that is what he's been finding.
Yeah, I've never served ayahuasca, but I sure have brought some home for my friend in Colombia so that they could do ceremony here when they came. And yeah, same thing. You pray over the luggage and you ask your guides and you trust in alignment and you let it go. And yeah, I get that. I think we touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but I kind of like to revisit it just a little bit. Do you have any clue? You're probably gonna have to guess, or decline to guess, but any clue how many possible Iboga providers there are in the States? I mean, it'd be hard for me to summarize how many are doing ayahuasca, but I have to assume there's just such a small community.
My order of magnitude guess is 10. I think it's on the order of magnitude of 10. I don't actually know that for sure. I've been kind of obsessed with Iboga for a few years now, so I know of other people who've gone and sat with other people in the US and beyond. I will say not that many people are serving straight Iboga outside of Gabon. I think that's true. Yeah, I think we're talking order of magnitude that. I know there's more than one. I'd be shocked if there's 100.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I would probably have to agree with that. I know of a few clinics that again that are doing the Ibogaine. I know of a handful, and when I say handful, I mean like three, and they're not all in the US though. So, even
Right.
there
Yeah.
that are
Yeah,
doing
and that's
Iboga.
my yeah, my shaman isn't based in the US. So, yeah. So,
And then the other question I have kind of following up to that is, what do you think in your mind separates a safe provider versus somebody with red flags? And I imagine this is probably universal throughout any plant medicine ceremony, but just your take.
I noticed I wanna, like, quibble with the word safe.
Okay. Fair.
I deeply, deeply believe we're each on our own, soul path here, and that we have the experiences that we signed up to have. And so what I think I hear you asking is, like, how should I if somebody wants to go about finding a provider, how would they decide if it's a good situation?
Yeah, good question.
And I mean, my best answer to that is like, and this is part of what I appreciate about the man I work with is he's always putting the power back in your hands. Trust your sense. Do you feel called? Does this feel like the right place? And of course, there's this interesting thing where your personality and ego structure are going to go are wandering off to go get very challenged. And so it's not like every little bit of it needs to feel comfortable or easeful. But like most of the people who end up sitting with Iboga have felt some sort of deep call to have them go face their depths. Can you find something deeply trustable that you're ready to listen to? And what is your experience of talking to this person? And, you know, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not like an expert vetter of medicine people. I basically got I will say that this I met this shaman because a dear friend of mine had been his apprentice for years. And so there was a way that like and then I knew a number of people who had sat with him. So I came with some kind of personal references that were meaningful. But for me, the decision of am I going to do this or not was very much just man, I like how this guy talks. And I feel seen. I like the way he sees. I like the way he's holds power. I like how he orients to the world. And I guess the best thing I could say is if you have a gut feeling that something is a bad idea, I would not ignore that. And at the same time, it's like, okay, but then if you've already signed up and now it's just your fear stories coming up, that could happen too. So
Sure.
I don't have a checklist for you.
That's fine. Yeah.
I'm
But
sure, yeah.
you actually did give me, I think, something that I would emphasize, or that I do emphasize, and I'll just repeat it here. And that is that I think that word of mouth is one of the strongest ways to navigate this space. If you have a very trusted friend, somebody that, you would follow, into battle or follow their advice no matter what. They've been there time in and time out for you time and time again. That I think that's a really good way for us to vet people in ceremony space because it really is difficult to navigate. So I love that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, like, I definitely would look for somebody who humble about power. Power is an interesting thing, and these are powerful medicines, but the more that they're here framing themselves as a guide to your empowerment, that's
Hmm.
probably a good sign versus trying to create, convince you that you need them, or like
Yeah.
somehow minimizing your sovereignty versus increasing it. And at the same time,
Yeah,
it
I
does
love that.
require a lot of surrender to get out of your ego, get out of your own way. So, but if the
Paradox.
baseline, yeah,
Yeah. I want to kind of circle back to Gabon. I know that there's multiple, like we said, there's multiple tribes and multiple traditions, depending, which is consistent throughout the world, I think. But if I'm also not mistaken, again, you may not know this, but if I'm not mistaken, some of those ceremonies over there involve like being buried up to your neck, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because, like you talked about, there is uh, a a death-like experience.
I would believe it. I definitely don't have the full catalog of Bwiti. That's the name of the sort of spiritual tradition. Bwiti lineages, Bwiti sects. Experiences. What I can tell you is that none of the ones I have heard directly about were that. So I wouldn't say it's not true, but I can tell you I've heard about. I had a friend who did one where he was like running through the forest a lot, like in motion, moving, and then eating mouthfuls of like raw, fresh Iboga. The stuff we eat is all dried, and there's a lot of dancing, a lot of movement. There's a lot of there's a lot of different ways it happens. That one was a particularly memorable one that stuck out to me. He's gone to Gabon a few times, this particular friend, so he'd had a few different ones that were even different from each other. I think I would say whatever you hear, no, it's just one of many ways. So yeah.
I'm going to ask you, I guess, what might be a controversial question. And for those of you who are just hearing this podcast now and haven't followed my social media in the past, it's probably a couple, 3, 4 weeks ago, I put out something where I had a friend who talked to an influencer, and the influencer was, they're personal friends, and the influencer was telling him, "Hey, man, you got to go do Ibogaine. Ibogaine is the best. It's the greatest. It's the pinnacle. All this hype, hype, hype." And where I kind of like in conversation with my friend, where I felt like I needed to share on social media was that, again, back to that Swiss Army knife metaphor, and that they all have their particular pluses and minuses and special capacities. I worry though sometimes that there is this hype around ibogaine and like it is somehow the greatest thing since sliced bread. Do you care to comment on that?
Yeah. I really appreciated your point of view on that, while at the same time, in my own completely biased way, being like, no, but I love Iboga so much. It's my favorite. And I can say that. I mean, and that for me, there's just something about it that's different than anything else I've experienced. And I also like the metaphor that was coming to mind as you were asking this question was CrossFit. Like there's this way that
Mm,
like people have gotten so, and this is a little dated, but like, how people just like CrossFit people were so obsessed with CrossFit and it was just
yeah,
this like, and it's like, it's not a bad thing, but like also it's really not the entire world. Like,
right.
and it may not be the
Pickleball's
best
fun
thing
too.
for, right, and exactly. Like, and what I was understanding about your concern when heard your social media stuff, which was part of how we got in this conversation, was I was responding to it. I
Yeah,
really
thankful.
appreciated your point of view, and your caution seemed smart to me in that there's also this way that just culturally the way it's working out, there are big populations of folks, and I think probably a lot of your audience, veteran community, for example, is a big part of it, that maybe like there's this way that ibogaine is getting normalized and mainstreamed and approved of, and any some stigma around psychedelics is getting pulled off of ibogaine more than other things, and
Hmm.
so it's becoming this like accessible thing. And then we can say, oh, yeah, it's the best. And I do think your caution is warranted. And especially for me, because when you're going to do Ibogaine at an Ibogaine clinic, you're going into a very medicalized experience. And actually, like that may be, it may make a big difference, but in some ways, it's like you're still in the same system that my heart thinks you probably need to step out of potentially to do some of your
Interesting.
healing.
Yeah.
There's like a and so I think your point is a really good one, that this idea that there's this just that it's just like up on a pedestal and somehow it's the it thing. It's like on the one hand, I love that it's bringing, unlikely people together to be in favor of these entheogen, healing modalities that can get underneath in very deep, interesting spiritual ways that, other like I like the possibility it's opening. I like the coalitions it's creating. I
Hmm.
like the minds it's opening to possibilities of plant medicine being a good ally for you. And I don't think everyone has to do plant medicine, but I also do think it's incredibly life changing for most people who do it. But yeah, I think so. If a bunch of good stuff gets to happen on Ibogaine's coattails, then like maybe it's okay. But I also do think like really appreciated your like anti hype stance about it. It made sense to me and it seemed wise.
Yeah, and actually, I think I'll just kind of segue that and I'll repeat it for those who maybe missed it. And it's not. I'm not saying Ibogaine is not great. Again, I'm speaking from from an inexperienced place. Like for heaven's sakes, I don't want to sound like an expert, but it was just more of a. My concern really truly comes down to this. If everybody thinks it is the absolute pinnacle, the very best, and we already have difficulty finding clinics that can provide, again, the extracted, the molecule, and those have to be done in clinical settings, and they're upwards of north of $6,000 each an experience. What we really are wrestling with, and I'm speaking. This one is from firsthand experience because I'm very closely associated with Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. That's the nonprofit, and Heroic Hearts. And I have many friends in them, many friends who've gone through the program, and nearly everyone will tell you that there is an 18-month wait or more to get into that clinic or those clinics. And to me, if we keep building that hype and we keep funneling people into that that outlet, even those that aren't wrestling with deep addiction, then what we are doing is we're extending the treatment time for some people who might be in very, very fragile space, very vulnerable space, making it, threatening, life threatening in some respects. So that, just for those who never heard it, that's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, and another piece I took from what you had said before too was this idea of like, yeah, if you think you have to spend, if you think this is the only hope for you and it's the best and nothing else will do, and that means you have to spend more money, you can't access it because of money, or you have to spend more money than you have, or you have to wait 18 months when you could spend significantly less and be in a different ceremony container working with a different plant medicine, in 3 weeks or however long,
Hmm.
like different time scale, different financial scale. Like let's not let this shiny object also distract us from a lot of other really good options that could help a lot of people and that are sort of more ready to meet more people where they are. Yeah, I hear you being concerned about a distortion.
Hmm.
That and putting it on a pedestal that is unrealistic and could have harmful unintentional consequences, and that makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and I personally am like a huge evangelist for Iboga. I'm constantly telling people about it. And there's a limited supply of that. Like it's, if everyone listening here wanted to do it, they probably can't. Like there's not that many people serving it. So I think it is amazing. And if you get the chance and it feels aligned, like wholeheartedly, I would recommend it. And at the same time, like if you're stuck in the story that it's your only hope and it's not flowing into your life, I would open yourself up to what else, to the prayer of what else is here for me, and
Yeah.
let it find you.
Absolutely, because there are so many other alternatives. And again, I think that comes back down to, proper intention setting as well, because if your intention setting is to deal with, depression or PTSD or maybe some more mild addictions, there are a lot of really capable medicines out there that can probably get you across the finish line, frankly, in that respect, without, again, chasing this very limited, and not only limited in terms of supply, but in terms of who can provide it in that clinical setting. Do you have anything else that you'd follow up with, or anything you felt was left on the table that you really wanted to share in this interview?
Just state again this idea that, these are these entheogens in particular, Iboga, ayahuasca, many of them, these are spirits that we can be in relationship with and that can be part of your path. And so, I didn't go looking for Iboga. I didn't know, I didn't have some idea it was a thing I needed. It found me in a very serendipitous way, and It kept getting called back in dreams and in other experiences. And so I guess I just want to say that, like, I do think part of the medicine of these medicines is inviting you into a different type of relationship with the world around you and with the universe at large than this more entirely rational, solve it, make the plan, create the mission, take the pill kind of thing. It's like there should be some mystery in it. There should be some divinity, some sense of I don't know, and of I can't quite think my way through it
Mhm.
around it. And so even just in that last part where we were talking about, fitting the medicine to the thing, it's like I would really invite like if some kind of support or help with something you're struggling with is a thing that you're deeply longing for. I think this was your assignment that you were just giving to my partner, who works with you. As This is how we met. Is my partner
Mhm.
is training with Matt to be a shaman, is to throw out a question and then let the universe give you the signs.
Mhm.
And I think that it fits with this kind of thing too, is like, is there a medicine that should be working for me? What is how can I heal? Let yourself be guided to where you are supposed to end up and it will be incredible. That's the
I
thing
love
I would
that.
want to say.
No, I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, yeah, I love that so much. And you're right. I think that I hope that a large part of my audience is the masculine and the veteran community who I think have lost a connection to the mystical, to the supernatural, because there's so much a part of our, just in the Western contemporary worlds that sort of seem to drown that out. And I understand it because I came from a very agnostic, alcoholic, angry place where, I'd worked hard and very rational, right? And so I didn't have that in my life. So for those of you who are hearing this and hearing Rachel's advice, I can't echo that enough that like and trust me, this is how I approached it. I approached it like my first ayahuasca ceremony. Like my intention was, please, dear God, don't let me go back to jail. Like that's a horrible intention, but
It got you there.
it got me there, but it wasn't textbook per se, but I too, like you said, I was manufacturing it. I was treating it like, okay, I'm on this mission. I got to solve this problem. I'm going to get this done and all these things. And didn't necessarily have my mind set on the mystical and the metaphysical. And so I do invite you to consider that in this journey because, again, these plants, these are entheogens, sacred plants. They are entities in fact, even as I say that, I get full body shivers and chills, reinforcing that idea that these are very, very sacred plants and they are entities with their own place in the universe. And we're not just taking it the way we don't want to take it the way big pharma offers, big pharma and pharmaceuticals. We want to do it very differently. And so, yeah, invite invitation. I might have to write that one down and remember that. That's awesome.
Awesome.
One more thing before you go. Let's do another word from our sponsors. Again, Larabelle and the Crazy Tree. This is a children's book. Again, all proceeds go to Donor Connect. And this is a story about finding your authenticity and marching to a beat of your own drum. We got From Green Beret to Shamanism, One Man's Journey to Heal. And all proceeds go to getting veterans into ceremony. So speaking of which. And finally, Olipop, a tremendous alternative to all of the poisonous things in our diet sodas and also none of the sugar in our sugary sodas and still wonderful and tasty and helps protect that gut biome, which produces serotonin, which makes us happy. So again, my deepest gratitude to you for your generosity, for coming on, for helping me and hopefully our audience make some real sense of this Iboga Ibogaine community and how to navigate it better. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I just want to tell folks if they want to find me out there in the world, and probably their best bet is to go to my website, which is wildgenius.com. And you can find, a way to get in touch with me there. You can find me on social media. And if you wanted any, I was pretty deliberately not giving any details about any of the work that I've done. But if anyone wanted to reach out to me privately and get more information, that they can find me wildgenius.com.
And we'll put those links in the
Yep.
comments below uh, for the
Fantastic.
audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks.